Welcome to The Bone, the podcast that goes deeper. Here we cut through the noise and get straight to the core of the issues that matter. From real stories to raw truths, we dive deep into the conversations that shape our world and challenge our thinking. We're not afraid to dig in and get to the marrow of it all. Whether it's life, culture, or business in sports medicine, we're here to break it down raw and real. No filters, no fluff, just to the bone. With your host, Shelby Daly, we're getting to the bone. This is a clinically pressed, approved CEU podcast. Find the quiz to gain credit at clinicallypressed.org/courses. Clinically Pressed Company, making the complicated simple through results that give back. Find out more at clinicallypressed.org. Let's get started.
Welcome back to the Bone. Today's guest is Paul Geisler. He's a retired athletic trainer and is an experienced athletic training educator and thought leader known for his work in advancing clinical reasoning and professional development in athletic training. Currently, he is in Massachusetts, and today we're going to talk about professional identity and how best do we define athletic training and educate others on what we do and progress the profession at the end of the day. So welcome to the show, Paul.
Thank you, Shelby. Great to be here.
Yeah. So we connected on LinkedIn, and I have read some of your articles, many articles that you've written at the end of the day. And so you've written so extensively about professional identity and the philosophical foundations of athletic training. What motivated you to start asking deeper questions and what athletic training really is?
That's a great introduction. Before I get into that, I want to thank you for all the work you do on LinkedIn and being provocative, for lack of a better word, for the work you do. Ask questions, rhetorical, philosophical, real, boots in the trenches questions. So we need more of that. So great job, and thank you for what you do. Good question to open. I think it's simple but complex. I'm old now. I'm 60. I've been certified since 1987. I've spent 4 or 5 years in high school as an AT. I spent a few years with pro athletes and then a bunch more with pro golfers. I did 3 years of college, Division I. I worked in sports medicine clinics as outreach AT before that term really existed, going back to early 80s. And I did a lot of that before I got into academics. So I kind of call myself an accidental academic. I didn't get into academics until I was like 32 as an instructor with my master's degree at Georgia Southern. And then after a few years of doing that, I figured out, hey, I guess I'm kind of good at this teaching thing, or at least I like it. And then kind of went into my academic career of running programs and trying to be an educator and a good program director and a scholar of my own ilk. So I've been around. I was around when internships existed. I've been around when we were accredited by KHEP and then the emergence of Katie, et cetera. So I've traveled those miles. I think the simple part of the answer to your great question is I'm just sick and tired of still telling people what an athletic trainer is, and I'm sick and tired of correcting people saying trainer. I love the Mike Tiricos of the world who've gone to great degrees, is getting an award or just got an award from us for his work and kind of really moving the needle and using the word athletic trainer all the time. And that goes to, some distant family members. I've been married for 37 years, and a few years ago I was talking to at a dinner meeting with my sister-in-laws and family, and she called me an athletic director, and I just froze and said, wait, what? I've been in this family for 37 years. You don't know what I do? And I think it was right before I retired my ATC credential. So, it's still ubiquitous enough. So that, and I'm a grumpy old guy now, and little things like on LinkedIn, I'm still seeing ATs use ATC incorrectly, referring to the profession, a professional like you or me as an AT, and they're saying ATCs. That sounds nitpicky, but we've tried to address those things for a long time, and we still don't do that ourselves. So they're kind of connected. If we're still having trouble identifying who we are using ATCs versus AT incorrectly in little ways that I think are bigger ways than some might appreciate, and we still have to explain to people we're not a trainer, and then go into what an athletic trainer is. I mean, I'm here, I'm a dean of sciences and health professions. We don't have athletic training here. to be clear. But still, all my colleagues, my co-deans, chairs, faculty, academics, bright people, whenever they hear the word sport or fitness, they look at me in a room and they go, "Oh, well, this is your thing." And I'm like, "Well, no, not really." So I just frustrated that we're still there, and that's where that paper. You want to go to AT school, said no one ever came from, kind of having that conversation. And I just got tired of hearing PT school, law school, dental school, med school, et cetera. And I'm like, you know what? Nobody ever says AT school. The AT school thing is not a thing. And there's a lot of reasons for that. So that's kind of where I got my doctorate in curriculum studies, curriculum theory. So a lot of philosophy, a lot of postmodern theory, how to deconstruct stuff, break stuff down. So it wasn't a pedagogy-based degree. It wasn't an educational administration-based degree. It was a theory, critique, postmodern cultural studies, like really, how do you break down education? And most of that program was focused on K through 12. Most of my peers were K through 12 teachers. They were getting this degree to do different things. And I was just, dipping my feet in the water as an instructor at Georgia Southern, being an AT educator and trying to figure out what accreditation was and, all those sorts of things. So very neophyte days. I was 32, 33. I was 35 when I finished my doctorate. So that period from like 32 to 35, where I was getting in academia, I was doing my doctorate in all this heavy philosophical, critical studies kind of stuff. And, I had, I don't know, 7, 8, 9 years of experience already at that point in different clinical settings. So I had some blisters and calluses on my hands as an AT, so to speak. So I think that all just morphed into a different way of seeing and being. And I tried to carve my scholarly agenda out on one level. The clinical stuff I did too, but the more professional side was geared towards how can I push kind of what you're doing? How can I ask difficult questions and that some people don't like, right? How can I push the needle? How can I be a little provocative in stuff that I do, whether it was serving on a committee and saying things or whether it was writing a paper?
Yeah. So I guess with my experience, what's your relationship with NATA right now, or has been in the past, with all these questions you've been asking?
Well, as you would guess, it's mixed. You ask some questions to some people or some things, right? Committees or bodies or positions, and they don't like them or they don't understand them. And so, perhaps some of it is I failed to get the message across. I read back that Who Wants to Go to AT School editorial that I pitched to Jay Hurdle, and I was quite surprised when he said, "Yeah, heck yeah," over a beer at an NATA conference, and he said, "Yeah, write it up," and it got published pretty quickly. I read back on that and I said, well, I don't know if I got my message across as clear as I want. And some people may not understand what I was trying to say. And that's on me, right? So the messaging is important. But, I challenged the MSAT move. I stuck my neck out. I generated a petition that within a couple of weeks got about 1,000 signatures. And, it was only designed to go out to educators. And I wasn't trying to say MSAT is the dumbest thing we've ever done. There's no way we should do it. This is stupid. I was simply trying to say, let's pump the brakes. The petition focused more on how it came about. At that point, I had been a program director for 7 years at Georgia Southern and maybe 8 or 9 or 10 or something at Ithaca. So almost not quite 20 years, but and I was involved with as an editor and a manuscript reviewer for the Educational Journal. I was on I was on multiple committees. I was involved. And I was surprised by that document, the white document that came out. And I was like, literally, I'm like, where did this come from? And it came from a very small group of people that were working on us behind the scenes. And they might say, well, you were aware of it. No, I wasn't. Did I miss an email? Maybe. Did I miss a communique somewhere? Maybe. Did I not go to the right conference or session at an NETA or EHA or something? Maybe. But I wasn't aware. And I literally remember going to my circle of other program directors in the Northeast, all from other longstanding, historically excellent programs like Ithaca. And saying, where'd this come from? Are you aware of this? And I got a lot of no's and a lot of, well, I heard something. So the communication, the work, how it was done was, to me, not the best way we could have done it. Right now, ship has sailed. We're there. Right, we've done the masters, but there's still a lot of things to investigate. And one of the last posts that I made on, I think, Julie Caballero's LinkedIn post was about that, about asking some questions. So that created a lot of friction. I got some nasty emails from people across the country that I don't know. I got emails from other people who said, "Hey, just to let you know, there are people out here, talking about your petition and telling people not to sign it." I had 3 emails from people that told me that other people, bosses and stuff, exerting power, saying, "Don't sign that petition." They saw it as anti-AT. If you read the language, it was simply, "Hey, this is from educators, right?" Some other people signed it; it got spread around, but it was designed for program directors, clinical ed coordinators, and faculty members to say, "Hey, hold on a minute. Maybe we can talk about this a little bit because we didn't have a voice in this." And one of the comparisons was the Canadian Athletic Therapy Association. Again, there's less programs. There were a dozen or so at the time. We were in the 250 range or something like that at that time, maybe 270. I can't recall. But they set about major changes in how they do education for the athletic therapy program profession in Canada, and they invited every single program that was accredited. They had 100% representation. We weren't even close. There was a group of at most 20 people that did a white paper, and the data point they used was about the entry level masters that existed back then had a higher BOC first time pass rate. That's it. That's the only major data point that was in there. Well, we were at that time, Ithaca College was in the middle of an 11-year first-time pass rate streak. Not one person in 11 years had failed, right? And there was others. Westchester, Delaware, Springfield, other great programs had great rates. How come they didn't ask me, how you do it, Paul? How does Ithaca College do it? Because clearly our rate is actually better than the entry-level master's programs. There were 10 or 11 of them. So it's one small example. There are at least 15 or 20 programs at the BS level that have been doing amazing work, preparing amazing athletic trainers, including great BOC exam results, which again is not the end all, that weren't asked any questions. How do you actually produce these great clinicians? Well, actually, here's how we do it. And then have a project generated from the grassroots. That was the point of that petition. But I got some nasty emails, and I started getting a lot of dirty looks at conferences and those sorts of things. And that's fine. I'm a big boy. So, but that's not productive. That's not good for a profession to move forward. And now you look at some of the growing pains of the masters. Once the ship sailed on that, it's okay, well, certain people made these decisions. You got to live with it. But the problem is that all the program directors had to then live with it, had to change their curriculum and go to the masters. And a lot of programs have closed. A lot of programs are struggling for enrollment. A lot of programs, from word of mouth, talking to people still in the biz, are struggling for quality students. And so this all plays into the knowledge paper and some of the other things that we read and some of the other things that I've talked about.
Yeah. So, as you said, the ship sailed. We're in the master's program status right now. What do you feel that the state of the profession is today? Are we any better off? Are we headed in a weird direction? I mean, I think you were right in pumping the brakes because a lot of these holes came out after the master's has been established. And I mean, some of the stuff I don't think we could have prepared for, like COVID and, the drop off in university just in general and their population and attendance. So I guess, what is your read and what do you think needs to happen to address some of these holes that are starting to pop up?
Well, the asterisk or caveat I would put is that I'm kind of on the sidelines now. So I did retire my ATC credential a few years ago. I'm in higher education administration, dealing with all of the higher ed challenges you've mentioned and more. But so I'm kind of on the sideline. So I don't have boots on the ground in AT. But my general impression is that no, things have not improved. We're still having the same conversations. You're still posing the same questions that we've talked about for years. I still see the same frustrating comments on both sides, on some of your comments on your LinkedIn conversations. The salary one is the big one. And the work Julie Cavaliero and her group at Old Dominion doing is so past need and so amazing, incredible. And she needs to keep doing it. Pushing the needle. And I think people were afraid to do that. People were afraid to call out institutions by name that posted egregious salary bands. I did it a few times, and I was always scared that someone was going to jump down my throat, right? But Julie's doing it from an academic and economic-based way and data-based way, and it's wonderful. But the conversation is still, the issue's still there. Have salaries eked up a little bit? Yeah, but data is data, right? You got to be careful. I mean, Kevin Gutzkowitz is a member of the NHTA. He's a president. Melissa Martin is still a member of the NHTA. She's a provost. I'm a dean, right? there are many people now that have gone into the academic leadership side as well as the athletic leadership side whose salaries are inflating, right? Some of that, I think, a dean's salary is a lot more than an on the boots high school or Division I, Division II, Division III college athletic trainer. The salary issue is still real. Now with the investment required to get a master's degree, it's even more real. And we did not spend enough time investigating that and hiring somebody who's an economic expert to study salary ROI. And Julie's work is bringing that out, and she's looking at cost of living compared to salaries. So I don't think things are any better, and it's concerning. It really is. It's an amazing job, but I don't think it's an amazing profession, and that's a controversial statement. You see some folks get angry and upset over, some things. Like, for example, I'm really frustrated with how many times I see, maybe twice a year, there's a conversation on LinkedIn, and I've gotten off of Facebook and those sorts of things. So most of the professional stuff I see is on LinkedIn. I still get really frustrated and upset when I see folks in the various AT clinical settings throw educators under the bus. Educators don't know what they're doing. Educators never practiced. I have, like I said, I have over 15 years of clinical practice before I became an AT, and that's not unique. There are plenty of educators that have real clinical experience. There are plenty of educators that are still working clinically. So it really is. It doesn't help the profession when someone makes a very generalist, essential statement that educators are behind the times, and we, the educational body, who's burdened with producing the next rounds and generations of practitioners and dealing with the next changes in accreditation and dealing with higher ed, right? And they throw educators on the bus that we're too disconnected from real clinical practice. I would argue, this could be controversial, I would argue that there are more people with clinical experience working in the educational world than there are people with educational experience working in the clinical world, if that makes sense. Right? There aren't many people that were formerly in education and ATEPs that left and went back to clinical practice, right? That are bringing the educational experiences to clinical practice. There are plenty of people that have brought various levels of clinical experience into the educational world. Are there some that don't? Yeah, but every profession's like that. Every profession. PhD folks don't really get a lot of real experience in their worlds a lot of times. PhDs typically don't get a lot of formal training how to educate either. So there's no perfect solution. So we need to avoid those essentialist kind of generalized statements. That doesn't move the profession forward. Salaries are an issue. I still think our cultural capital is low. I've responded that you're probably getting sick of me when you post something, and I'll say cultural capital. There it is again. That to me is the essential issue, and it's not that complicated. It simply means we don't have the authority that we should have, that we feel we should have. I think the NHA lost the biggest opportunity it's ever had to elevate our cultural capital, and that was when the Buffalo Bills player had Commotion Cordis, Hamlin, I think that's his last name. If I were president or a CEO of the NHA, executive director, I would have emptied the bank and paid a high-profile Park Avenue marketing advertising firm to make the most amazing commercial about athletic training. And I would have put that on every Saturday and every Sunday, football for the next 12 months or whatever. That was our opportunity to break this mold of what an AT is and what a trainer is. And we just give water and we just tape and we do all those sorts of things. So I really think that was a mark. I mean, the world saw athletic trainers bring somebody back from the brink of death, or even perhaps he was even technically dead. And yeah, there was some good press after that, and the leadership did some good stuff after that. And Damar Hamlin's been great after, but do we get the impact, the long-lasting impact that we could have gotten from that? I don't think so. So people are leaving the profession. Obviously, at the university level, it's not good. We can't keep people. Like I said in one of my papers, I think the AT school one, I had collected data for 6 years before we went to the master's degree. I think I collected everything I could, and one of it was data from our alums. And over a 6-year period, 40% of our ATs from Ithaca, one of the best programs in the country since 1975, coming up on its 50th anniversary this spring, 40% of our students had left. And gone into PA, nursing practitioner, med school, chiropractic, you name it. And they were all, very, very good students and great. And most of them went into AT. They didn't just, a few of them did the bounce, the AT pre-bounce to something else. But most of them, 95% of them, went into AT And 60 or 70% of that 95% went to a post-professional master's at UVA or Chapel Hill or Delaware or Kentucky or AT Still, right? Got their master's, advanced their stuff, and then went and started practicing. And 4, 5, 6, 7 years later, they're writing me apology emails. I still remember apology emails. People write me apologizing because they're going to PA school. I'm like, you don't have to apologize, right? So those sorts of things hurt when you put everything you can in the profession and you know this is a great job and a great healthcare profession, but the profession itself pushes people away or makes people unable to stay because they don't have the structural power or the cultural capital that we should have to take care of their family, to advance their careers, afford a house, all those sorts of things.
Well, that's one of the posts I did about a month ago was on TV. The representation of athletic trainers is so bad. I mean, Taylor Sheridan is usually very detail oriented, but I don't have all the details on how filming happens at some of these locations and the deals that happen with the schools. But I was more mad that TCU has an accredited master's program and nobody was there to help guide the filming or the representation of what an athletic training student is. I think they gave them too much autonomy, and the tape didn't make any sense on the ankles at the end of the day. And then even, Grey's Anatomy, there's all these medical shows, and how have NATA not approached any of them to try to get a spotlight of what an athletic trainer is? I mean, all of these programs go into the community on their shows. The Grey's Anatomy example, they responded to two track athletes that had hit their heads, and the EMS was the first to respond, or it might have been cheerleading. I don't know. But it was just like, what a great segue of you have a primary care provider there. It takes a little of the drama away, but we've seen a lot of drama on the sideline that could have definitely segued into Grey's Anatomy very easily with a competent healthcare provider. But some of these relationships I think are lacking from our professional presence in the community. And how are we not with SAG or anybody trying to educate what athletic trainers do? It would be a great sitcom or drama of what it's like to be on the sideline as an athletic trainer. We see so much stuff that people want to watch.
100%. And I posted that State Farm commercial with Patrick Mahomes. And I think the woman in there was actually one of the staff, either PTAT or AT, from the Chiefs. And again, it used, I think, Megan Trainor, right? And so it's kind of funny, but I'm like, hold on a minute, this is not helpful. It promotes the trainer part, but it starts with us, Shelby. I about 12 years ago or so, when I was at Ithaca, I actually put a mandate out to my faculty, my students, and our marketing folks. I said, 0 pictures on our webpage with ankle taping, 0 pictures squirting water. And a couple people are like, well, it's part of our job. I'm like, yes, it's part of our job. Part of our job is wiping the tables down and locking the door and turning off the lights, right? When the last athlete leaves. But it starts with ourselves. It wouldn't be that big of a lift for every AT that has a website, that has a brochure, that has a LinkedIn, whatever, right? To clean it from taping ankles, from giving out water. I cringe, and again, this is controversial. I cringe every time a TV camera zooms in on either an AT student or an AT staff person squirting water into a football player's mouth, because again, hydration is part of our job. But really, I think that's horrible for our profession. Who's that person? Oh, that's a trainer, and it's a football player who just played 3 plays, and he can't even grab the bottle and squirt it in his mouth. Right? If I were a head AT, I would say we're not doing that. And that's okay. My job is to make sure you hydrate. But years ago, our job was still, when I was still practicing, our job was still to make sure they were hydrated. But we didn't do the squirting for them. We just walked around and said, here, drink, right? And we had to find different ways to do it. One of the hottest days of my life was in South Texas with the Orlando Thunder, the American Football League. We had IV like 4 guys at halftime, right? And then 3 or 4 more after. I needed one after the game. It was so hot and I lost so much water. But I don't think it's good if we're going to promote cultural capital and authority as a healthcare profession to see folks that are highly trained, highly competent, and should be highly paid, and sometimes they are highly paid, squirting water in grown men's mouths. Right? We don't need to do that. And again, some people will yell at me because they might think that's naive on my part. But it starts with us. And if we use ATC incorrectly, if we, by accident put trainer and not athletic trainer, if we have pictures on our website of the more lower level technical skills, right? Because I think one of the themes of our profession is still some people see us as technicians. And now with the government, potentially signing this bill where, we and PAs and nurses and PTs and others aren't going to be considered as professions. I mean, that's a death knell to us. I mean, how do we survive not being called a profession when we kind of are struggling to be called a profession now when the government does something like that? It was great to not see AT listed in most of the media outlets with PT and OT and PA and yada, yada, yada. But we're in there. I mean, you do the deep dive, AT is clearly one of those. So how do people afford to get into the profession? How does that impact diversity and who can afford to become an AT? Those are all systemic based factors that I don't think we're in great shape to respond to.
Yeah. Well, and I think, we're kind of harshing on NATA, but if they own the athletic training symbol, they are the head of marketing for the profession, is my impression. And, I was talking to another guest, and it was National Athletic Training Month is in March. It's coming up in a week. Why do we keep sending, posters of what athletic training is to put in the athletic training room? I'm pretty sure everybody in that athletic training room knows what we are. So how do we penetrate the barrier around athletics and get into the campus? And that's where I think, from the marketing standpoint, why haven't they come out with media packages so that, I'm going off traditional athletic training because that's the easiest way, but why aren't we coming up with media packages to send across campus so that we can highlight the athletic trainers that are working within the campus community so that more people know what we are and we can get into another layer of promotion and education? That's where it just, to me, seems a little bit lazy or complacent that we keep in these athletic circles. I am pretty sure that most athletes know what we are. We just need to get to that third layer of into the public eye, especially since we have athletic in our name. We are so much more than just treating athletic patients too, especially with the emergence of the industrial, military, tactical, all these different settings. So how are we breaking those barriers? And I don't know if we've really resonated super heartily with that.
Yeah, there's a lot there to unpack, but there's a couple great points, and one is the poster part. And I hadn't thought of that, and it's actually brilliant. And like those posters should be going to pediatricians' offices so parents see it. They should be going to emergency rooms so people realize, oh, I could actually have an athletic trainer look at my ankle and realize, based on the auto ankle rules, it's probably not fractured. I don't have to spend 6 hours here waiting for an X-ray for an ankle sprain, right? So we could have been spending. That's a great point. We could have been spending those efforts and those dollars marketing what AT is to somebody else, and I think that's been a struggle. The other thing you mentioned in there is our name. I mean, when we moved to the Masters, I raised the point. I said, can we bring up the name change conversation and do this all at once? If I believe in struggling or suffering with pain in a short period of time. I believe in struggling quickly, right? So there was a struggle with the MSAT, and that might have been our last decent chance to change our name. It got shot down. It's like, no, we're not doing it. We've already done it. We've already been there. The name is problematic. Do I have a great suggestion? I don't know. I don't think so. But I would love to have, I think somebody might. Athletic therapist is better than athletic trainer. But yes, I know our friends in PT probably would fight tooth and nail to let us do that. But they do it in Ireland. They do it in Canada. They do it in, other places. But then again, it only captures the therapy part. So there's not a perfect name, but that's the identity struggle we have. What is our name? What do we do? That's kind of goes into the knowledge paper that you read. Whose knowledge is it anyways, right? A body of knowledge. And I'm really concerned. The other thing I think is concerning for me is that we've really become all things to all people. I think it's a misguided effort. In our attempt to be more legitimate and have more authority and have more cultural capital, we've spread ourselves to everything. We added to our scope of practice. Technically, we didn't. Let me correct that. We added to our content, right? And that came from the CATIE. Most people don't know that NATA Professional Education Committee used to control and had copyright control over the competencies. And somewhere about 10 or 12 years ago, the CATIE took those over. Most people aren't even aware of that. And we did when I was chair of the educationalist community, which now doesn't exist anymore, which is also problematic. We did an analysis, and we were going to do a report, and then things kind of got a little too heavy, and I moved and took a job, and I stepped down as chair, whatever. But we did an analysis of PA, nursing, OT, speech path, et cetera, our non-medical cousin kind of professions, non-physician. And we are the only one where our accrediting body, this is like 6-7 years ago, we're the only one where our accrediting body owns all of the competencies. So so we have the role delineation study, which we mentioned in the knowledge paper, et cetera. We have standards, we have content. Who is dictating what the next step of the profession is? Our accrediting body. That's not the job of an accrediting body. Accrediting body, in a nutshell, is to maintain and validate quality of education, period. So in my opinion, again, I've created a lot of enemies, and people who hear this might jump down my throat. And again, I'm a few years outdated. Things may have changed, so don't jump down my throat if there's something different. But when I left as a program director and was fighting some of these trench battles, the CATIE has gotten more and more control over the profession, not over the quality of education, which is an accrediting body's job, over the profession. I think that's a conversation that's missing. I don't think people are aware of how much control the accrediting body has over the profession itself. And it starts with the standard, it starts with the competencies. And so our competencies now are huge. It added all sorts of things that were controversial, and now they've quieted down. Suturing and, low-level pharmaceutics and pharmaceutical information and all those other things. And we've extended, as you mentioned in your last comment, we've extended our populations. So one question that AT really needs to ask is who are we? Right? If we're all things for all people, do we really have a specific scope of practice and a body of knowledge? We know that we share, steal, borrow a lot of knowledge from other professions, orthopedics, right? General practice, mental health, nutrition, strength and conditioning, right? I remember back in 1983, my first sports medicine class, it was one of the things on the board in Sports Med 210 at Marietta College was sports medicine, an umbrella term. Some people use an umbrella, some people use the pie, right? And it's ortho and PT and AT and strength conditioning and dentistry, right? Has that piece of the pie or portion of the umbrella for AT gotten any bigger since 1983? Now, we've said it, we state it, we beat our chest. We have the competence, we have the knowledge, we have the skills for X, Y, Z. If you look on the backside or the back door, what's happening? Strength conditioning has now taken over some of the stuff that we used to do. We've left it behind, and we're trying to go on to other things. And to be blunt, the PT profession in many places, not everywhere, but in many places, certainly in New York State, where I was for 16 years, has worked hard to keep their thumb on us and not let us go into certain parts of their backyard. So the border crossing is a professional sociology term. Right? We've been border crossing for a long time. Let's be real. That's where the AT profession came from, right? Yeah, some of it was ours unique, but we border crossed, we border jumped, we borrowed from ortho, from gen, et cetera. Now, where are we now? Yeah, we own some of our own knowledge. The incredible research and practice and EBP on exertional heat analysis from Casa and his group, from Guskowitz's and other folks on concussion work, numerous other scholars on ethics and professionalism, Kim Peer, for example. We now can say we own a body of knowledge, and we have the evidence to prove that we are good at this, we're good at that, and we make change positively in this way and that way. But we don't have that for our entire body of knowledge, for all of our competencies. We don't have that for suturing and joint dislocation reduction, right? Which we just went out and grabbed with the latest, not the latest, but when CATIE went to the master's degree and they changed the competencies, right? There was a land grab there. There was a big border crossing, river crossing, whatever way you want to look at it, of competencies, skills, knowledge from other professions. And you look at it now, it's really everything. It's like med school in a can. And relate that back to the master's degree. We went from programs at the undergraduate level that were 3 or 4 years long, to basically 2.5 years. My challenge at Ithaca, when we decided to go for it, was to bring a very successful 4-year program that we progress students clinically and maturity-wise and knowledge-wise and confidence-wise over 4 years and had great outcomes to, oh my God, how are we going to do this in 2 years? Not only do what we've been doing in 2 years, the seasoning, the slow progression, the moderation, et cetera, but they gave us more to put in it, right? And so when you add to your curriculum, very infrequently, when you add to a curriculum, whether it's PT or OT or AT, very infrequently do you jettison stuff. So like IPE, for example, became a hot button thing and then a required thing. Most places, at least initially, IPE became, and for us at Ithaca, the same thing. It became and here at Simmons with our programs, it's an extracurricular thing because there's no room in the curriculum. Right. So these are things that when we went to the master's degree, there weren't a lot of educators there that have experience building curriculum, adapting curriculum. There was not a lot of expertise, if any, about competency-based education. Right. That was not really listed there. Most people probably don't even know what the actual science and art of CBE is, where it came from. So these are conversations that weren't had in moving to the master's degree. These are conversations that weren't had when Katie took over a large part of our professional progress and changes. And so now we, the profession, those are still involved in educating the next generation of practitioners, are dealing with a lot more pressure and power from the accrediting body, and an economic pressure of bringing students in and keeping the program alive financially. And I'm a dean now, and I look at closing programs and those sorts of things, and return on investment for those students, and incredible pressure to turn students that come to those programs with, bachelor's in kinesiology, exercise science, pre-health, those sorts of things, right? And within 2 years, turn them into a competent, adaptable, resilient athletic trainer who can go practice independently. That kept me up a lot at night, and that scared the bejesus out of me. So those are all interrelated kind of aspects that I don't think we as a profession have done enough of the 30,000 foot view assessment and discussion on, in terms of when we make some changes or criticize or optimize the profession.
Yeah. Well, and I think we haven't done a good enough job of making sure we protect some of our proprietary skills or settings. Because I know that in California, a lot of PTs are taking 2-day courses for emergency care so they can provide sideline coverage. So that's, I think, why I wanted to have you on was, what are we as athletic trainers? What is our bread and butter? Because our bread and butter keeps getting spread very thin, which I think is great at the end of the day, but we're kind of losing the core of what an athletic trainer is. And, you brought up about the crediting body. I'm still confused on how the strategic alliance is supposed to work at the end of the day, and it's supposed to be equal, but there has to be some sort of hierarchy at the end of the day too, for someone to just make a decision. And after doing the practice analysis with the BOC, it kind of showed this continuous circle where it's just spinning, but nobody's actually self-checking each other. And it was the question that came up at the beginning of our panel was, well, but who's getting the initial approval to do these sort of things? Is it the BOC because we're setting the standards of what an entry-level athletic trainer is supposed to know? Is it the education of the accrediting body for academics? And then there's the NATA, which kind of, but doesn't really have much feedback on it. So who in the whole scheme of this alliance, and then we have the foundation for the research and all that, but who's making the decision to add or take out things? And I couldn't come up with an answer. And then who's also following up and checking that these are reasonable competencies to have within the profession? Like you had said, we keep adding, but we're not really deleting anything. And I think that's where we're losing sight on what are the core competencies of what an athletic trainer truly is, and how are we selling other people on what we do.
You nailed it. I mean, exactly. I questioned the strategic alliance years ago, and when I was chair of the educational community, trying to do things, I got my wrist slapped a couple of times because, for example, I reached out to the BOC one time to talk about can we create CEU categories like we used to have years ago for educators, and I gave them all the rationale and reason. Right? You know, the best example is we have to integrate EBP into the curriculum now. Right? We have for a while. So anybody that's an AT faculty member in an accredited program has to know EBP well enough and integrated the curriculum so that students are getting it so they can have it for BOC and blah, blah, blah. And I said, it doesn't make sense that somebody who has to learn that, teach it, and get results with students can't get actual EBP CEUs in the BOC for it. So I reached out for that conversation with Pat Sexton, who I think was the president of the BOC at that time. And he was like, yeah, and he was a program director. He's like, this is a great conversation. And then someone found out that I did that outside of the channels of command of the Strategic Alliance, and I got my wrist slapped, and it shut it down. And then lo and behold, a few years later, the conversation came up, and now it's there. And I was like, this is antithetical to progress, right? That we're worried about these sorts of political things and who's talking to who and that sort of thing. So I raised the issue of the overbearing power of Katie in a meeting when I was on the professional education committee, and I got yelled at in a meeting. And I said, you don't think there's a conflict of interest? You don't think that our accrediting body has too much power over the profession? Meaning, and that got shot down. And so I think, to your point, there's confusion about who does what and what is it doing, if anything. But what I saw from the inside out, from being on multiple committees and chairing the educational community, was they got too cozy. They're so worried about not offending somebody that they didn't want to offend anybody that conversations were shut down and progress was delayed. And so I don't think they should be aligned. I think they should collaborate, right? As professionals, the BLC has a job, the Katie has a job. Katie's job is to ensure quality of educational programs, period. Right. And again, that may seem too blunt of a statement, but that's what a regional accreditor does. That's what any accrediting body does, is make sure you're doing what you're supposed to be doing and you're doing it well, and that you have the data to show it. It should not be driving clinical practice. It should not be driving competencies, in my humble opinion. And again, 3, 4, 5 years ago, we did a large body of research on that, and some of it may have changed. So caveat, it's 5 years old, 6 years old. And then the BOC, right? So is Texas still have their own state license exam, for example? Right.
Yep.
That's problematic. We have a BOC, then Texas, where our headquarters has their own exam. But extend that a little bit further. One of the problems we have that nursing and PT and medicine don't have is that we have 48 different state practice acts, or is it 49 now? Right.
49.
Is anybody? If I had time, I would actually get them all in and put them in ChatGPT and do an analysis. Arguably, are any of them the same? If they're not the same, do we have a common scope of practice? If we don't have a common scope of practice, do we have a common level of expertise and competence? Do we have a common body of knowledge? That's kind of where we went with that article on knowledge. We're thinking about it, actually. Pat and I, your timing is great. Pat McKeon and Jen McKeon, my co-authors on that, we had a beer at EHA recently. We're thinking about redoing it and kind of revisiting a little bit because things have changed. So we don't have portability of our license. I know they're working on that. In some states you do, in some states you don't, but that's just to allow someone to visit and travel with a team, right? And work short term if you're there for 5 days or spring break, right? Think about the number of years we all travel with our teams and for spring break and road trips and didn't have any portability of our license, right? That's a problem for our profession. That decreases our authority. It decreases our autonomy. And it's because we have 48 or 49 different practice acts. Are we expected to follow them all every time we go to a different state? If we're in New England and we're in NESCAC and we travel to 6 different states, do we have to have awareness of 6 different practice acts? That doesn't help us. So I think 10, 20 years ago, leadership in NHTA should have seen this and should have sat down and went, we need to get a central licensing act. We need to standardize this, because in PT, you take one board exam and it's pretty much the same. So if we have 48 different practice acts, that 48 different states don't know what an AT can do, how do we share that with the public?
Yeah. Well, and that's, we do have the interstate compact that's coming out that the BOC is sponsoring. It's not going to be every state, but it's which states want to enter the compact. Right. But, the next step is educating people on what the athletic trainer needs to do individually to be able to honor that. I'm hoping next week that I have players' health insurance on, and we need to tailor our professional liability insurance to being able to cross state lines. Because when I was in Philadelphia, you could dry needle in New Jersey, but when you came into Philadelphia, you couldn't dry needle. So like the 76ers, they practice in New Jersey, and then they come over and play in downtown Philadelphia. So it's one of those things of, like you said, what is the core of what an athletic trainer can do in each state? Because if you're traveling with a team and you do cross state lines, yeah, I can give you a competent list of things I can do to help you, but right after we cross that line, I can't do half of those things. So that's where it gets confusing. I mean, if you're employed by that person, you should be able to keep with your state practice act when you're crossing state lines, but it gets very murky. And what happens when somebody spots you doing something that an athletic trainer is not supposed to do, and all these accusations happen. I don't think that stuff is happening, and it probably is. I don't know if it's happening or not at the end of the day.
Well, that's like the granular or micro level, right? I was referring more to, if you move from one state to another, you got to reread a whole different practice act, which may have a different scope of practice. One small related example: New York State finally, just in the last few months, they got licensure. It came to fruition right in December or right in January. Amy Brunel, if you're listening, and a few others, spent 6, 7, 10 years. It was like 19 years something, but between changes of the act. But like I was on the committee and I went to Albany a couple of times, and this is going back about 10, 12 years ago. The PT Association in New York was the biggest obstacle to getting a legitimate AT license in New York. The word neurological was in there, and it was like months and months of back and forth because they didn't want neurological, because they didn't want us treating with MLS patients or ALS, MS patients or MS patients or ALS. Right? I'm mixing the two. Sorry. Right. And like, well, we're not going to do that. It's like, well, the practice, if your practice act has the word neurological in it, you might start doing, treating those types of patients. And initially you get upset. You think that that's nonsensical, but you pause for a second, think about it going, okay, well, ATs have been land grabbing, have been border crossing for decades now. And like, who's to say you're not going to then do that? And my response was, well, if an AT does that, then sue them, right? Or arrest them or whatever. They shouldn't be doing that. It's not in their educational program. It's not on the BOC. But I see their side of the thing. But we had to navigate and wordsmith and argue for years about that. And we're like, the initial argument was, well, concussions are neurological injuries. If someone, has a dislocation of a joint, there's a potential neurological injury, right? We had to give these contextual scenarios that ATs could see any given day. That argument didn't fly right away. So they're protecting their scope of practice, their body of knowledge, right? Neurological is a very specific specialty within PT, neuro, peds, cardiopulm, et cetera, ortho, et cetera, et cetera. And we have these residencies and fellowships that I don't know how they're going, but we're trying to fix that a little bit. But from a general BOC entry level practitioner standpoint, right? That was one small example of a 10 or 15-year argument back and forth with folks in Albany going, which way should I look at this, the PT side or the AT side? And in this case, PT had much more members, a lot more money, and they were able to keep us down, for a long time. And now AT finally has, in New York State, a licensure. When I was there, we were certified. We didn't have a licensure. And anybody could do athletic training as long as they didn't call themselves a certified athletic trainer. Right. So how many other states have these gray spots, have these loopholes? Again, some states are kicking butt and they change it and they got strength and they got power. But the point is, if we don't have a common body of knowledge, how can we claim authority? Right? How can we claim legitimacy? And when a large part of our body of knowledge is borrowed or stolen, if you will, from other professions, right? How much comes out of us? To your point, right? PTs are doing sideline sports medicine courses. They've been doing sport concussion training for a long time, right? They've decided to come now almost like a Pac-Man. They're like turning around and Pac-Manning us. Strength conditioning is now kind of Pac-Manning stuff we've left behind. Some of the high-level sports performance stuff. Pat McKeon brought this up years ago, and he was right. We kind of left it behind. he's made the point for a long time that we kind of came out of physical education. So the physical, motor learning and movement science and those sorts of things we're kind of leaving behind. We're leaving to strength and science folks who are doing, I think, a great job of using data and data science now for, performance related issues and rest and recovery and those sorts of things. That was part of our domain. Is it as much as a part of our domain as it used to be? I don't know. Maybe strength and conditioning has grabbed what we've not been paying attention to as we take more gen med stuff, as we've taken more mental health stuff. And again, I'm not saying we don't have roles in this, but the big thing for the last 10 years has been interprofessional education. Interprofessional education, IPE, is designed to enhance IPP, interprofessional practice. Enhanced interprofessional practice is intended to improve patient outcomes. That's the simple algebraic equation. IPE produces greater, IPP produces better patient outcomes. Is it doing that? Don't know. Takes a long time to collect that kind of data. But if you're trying to do IPE, I mean, everybody goes in the sandbox together and say, hey, I'm an AT, hey, I'm a PA, hey, I'm a dietitian, hey, I'm a optometrist, hey, I'm a mental health counselor, right? Let's all talk about how we're going to handle this case together. That's difficult for an AT because we don't have an explicit body of knowledge. We're like, well, we can do that, and we can do that, and we can do that. And so what are other professions going to do? Be like, whoa, really? You got a 2-year master's degree, and you know how to do that? Slow down, right? Mental health people are going to make us pump the brakes. I think that's problematic. If we can say we can do everything in any patient population, if they're active, we can do that. If they're young, we can do that. If they're old, we can do that. If they're disabled, we can do that. And again, I'm not saying, to be clear, I'm not saying there aren't ATs who have improved their acumen, their knowledge, and their skill set and dedicated. Absolutely, there are. There are ATs that have done amazing stuff with disabled populations and the Special Olympics and those sorts of things that are clearly moving the needle, et cetera, et cetera. There are folks in the industry and military, 100%. So I'm not saying it's a bad thing that we've expanded those areas. I'm saying from a professional standpoint, we haven't necessarily appreciated what that does to us, how it stretched us so thinly, and how it connects to our inability to have the cultural capital we want and feel we deserve, right? And the authority and legitimacy that we feel we deserve, which then impacts our salaries and our cultural capital and people not knowing what a trainer is. And, oh, you work with athletes? Yes, but, right? How many times do we have to say yes, but? So those are some of the pieces of the systems-based problem that is associated with our professional condition and or advancement.
Yeah. Well, and I think to your point, some states are having to get their scope of practice changed in that it's so specific on population. So it's going from athletic population to physically active population. And so it's just like even those verbiages utilized on where we're able to practice and all that stuff. So, crossing state lines, if I have a business that is a certain population, I'm not going to be able to move that business across state lines because those people don't qualify. And I think, I'm not sure how industrial athletic training is navigating those verbiages, and I'm sure that's why some states are updating it at the end of the day. But it's we pigeonholed held ourselves so long ago, and it took us so long to realize that practice acts really should be probably at every 5-year update, where some states haven't touched it in 30-40 years. So I mean, I know it's a very expensive expenditure to update so often, but if we're going to keep relevant and be able to understand what our core responsibilities are, you have to kind of spend the money to keep updating what we're all doing.
Yeah, and not just the populations that we quote unquote serve, but go back to content, skills, and competencies, right? Every time someone, now Katie, decides, oh, you know what? And let's just take the most recent kind of edition. Sutures, joint reductions, dry needling is out there now, a diagnostic ultrasound, right? These new emerging technologies and skills. And every time they kind of come out and some ATs learn how to do it, then they kind of bring it back and say, okay, hey, I've been doing this and my doctor lets me do this, right? And we're doing this here in Boston, and my physician under his license lets me do these things, which was literally a conversation at NETA that I went to for a Katie's session when they were introducing these new competencies, and suturing was one of them. It's like, well, I've been doing this for years. My team doctor lets me do this. It's like, that's how that got into the competencies. That's how that got into our body of knowledge. And if you look at the sociology of professions, in particular healthcare, your body of knowledge needs to be substantiated by evidence, right? And outcomes. Before we added all these things, did we have outcomes that ATs were doing these things well? Certainly not. Did we have evidence that before all the evidence from Doug Costa's lab in UConn and other folks at Westchester and the lab done there, and all of the great work, and let's just use concussions and women in ACL research and exertional heat stroke as three areas where ATs have clearly, three amongst others, that have clearly developed a large body of evidence, right? That we know how to recognize it, prevent it, treat it, and we get outcomes, right? We have data for that. That's what's required technically to support or substantiate a body of knowledge that we're saying is ours. How many areas of our practice do we have that kind of data for? That we do it well, and we save money, we save lives, we get people back to practice and play quicker, safer, right? All of those metrics, any way you want to look at it. How many of our areas of our scope of practice, our competencies, do we have evidence for that we do it safely, efficiently, and cheaply? All right, asking for a friend. It's a rhetorical question. The answer is not a lot. The answer is not a lot, right? The answer is not a lot. So every time we add another skill, let's say we add, I'm going to go crazy. Let's say we add intubation. Oh, ATs can do it, right? ATs been doing it in the emergency room. Okay, ATs went in the emergency room. They're physician extenders. They're doing intubation, right? So now a group of ATs, again, this is totally hypothetical, somewhat farcical, right? But who knows what's going to happen. So a group of ATs that have learned how to do this, or doctors taught them, their state maybe allows them to, maybe their doctors just said, yeah, you're cool, I'm going to teach you how to do this. They all of a sudden come forward and say, hey, AT should be doing this. That's kind of what's happened over the last 20 years. That's how our scope of body of knowledge has expanded. No evidence that we do it great. And so if I put on my educator hat, right, when I got to Ithaca and then started doing this, is when all the Gen Med stuff blew up. I literally got assigned Gen Med 1, Gen Med 2, which is med school in a can. Do we have evidence that ATs do all that stuff well? No. Was I trained in that? No. But I had to learn how to teach it and teach it well to my students because it was required for accreditation. It was going to be on a BOC exam, and students were expected to know those things as part of their scope of practice. So how many states, for example, right now have clearly delineated in a scope of practice that doing suturing on the field, in the sideline, on the athletic training room is part of the scope of practice? I don't know the answer to that question. Do any? Are people doing it without it being a scope of practice? Or are they doing it because their physician says so? Now, we have to remember that for decades, half a century, whatever, AT almost everywhere had some language under the supervision of a physician, which means you had to get a physician to sign off. You think about all of the tournaments we covered, road races, et cetera. The ATs for the last 50 years have covered soccer tournaments for the weekend, free, cheap, whatever, right? Where there's been no supervising physician. Mm-hmm. I did it. Those of us been around, we've all done it, right? Students working summer camps, doing whatever camps. They're students, not even certified yet, and they're doing AT stuff. Is there a physician there? No. Now we've cleaned all that up, right? And Katie's been good at that and clarifying. You can't do this, you can't do that, and we've moved the needle on it. Yes, but that's where we came from, right? We came from this umbrella of working on some shape or form, a license of a supervised physician, and he or she supervised you and knew what you were doing and let you reduce something. Okay, you can reduce patellas, but not elbows. Okay, cool. I can handle patella. I'm not going to touch an elbow, right? But now we've been advocating as a group that we should be able to do all of it. We're there first. Okay. Or suturing. And I said this at that meeting, the Katie meeting at NATA was in Baltimore 10 to 15 years ago. I said, what happens first time an athletic trainer who's certified sutures someone on the eyebrow, and A, it gets infected and causes a great infection that really gets bad, or B, scars over so bad that the family sues the athletic trainer and the school that person works with. What happens, right? Just because we taught them it on a model in the classroom and they have maybe taken a test on a BOC exam, asked a couple of questions about procedurally, how do you do it? I don't know how to do it. I've never taught it and I've never done it. I'm never going to do it because I didn't, even though I might have learned it in an AT program, did I actually have a physician watching me do 10 or 12 of these throughout a residency or a fellowship to make sure I can do it and not hit a nerve or not puncture the eyeball or not cause an infection or not cause major scar tissue? That's a cosmetic problem. Right? These things were just glanced over. They weren't studied. They were those sorts of things. So some people might accuse me of being too much of an alarmist and being too exaggerative or hyperbolic, but that's the way I think. Chess and game theory and systems theory, you got to kind of think ahead, a couple moves ahead. I don't know if those things have happened. Maybe there's some news stories out there, but it goes back to without a concerted, agreed upon professional body of knowledge that's based on evidence, that's based on expertise, not on competence, right? And it's based on an explicit articulation of what those skill sets are with certain populations. And the fact that we have 48 or 49 different practice acts is something nobody's really talked about. And that is holding us back from being able to see what an AT school is about. I want to go to AT school. Which is, I think, hopefully was a clever title to an editorial that I put in JAT a few years ago.
Yeah. Well, I have so many questions from what you just said. I'm hoping I can get them all. So I guess, when are athletic trainers going to start saying no to certain skills is kind of my rhetorical question, because we keep just saying yes, 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 yes. And then secondly, the only thing that I've really heard pushback on is I haven't looked into it super deeply, but when do we get to the point that we don't need physician oversight? And would that kind of help stop how many skills we keep adding under the scope? Or is that just the inherent result of research, is we're just going to try stuff out and then we'll make research from it? Not that I want to roadblock any of the innovation or anything, but I feel that these are kind of variables that could maybe help direct the profession. Because if you have physicians, everywhere in the country saying, yeah, I'll let you do that, whatever, like, that makes my job easier or provides better care. And then another physician saying, no, I'm not going to let you do that. But it feels like it kind of bypasses the scope of practice or the practice acts that the states have put together, if you have physicians kind of overriding it at the end of the day. So that's kind of a oddly big question, but what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, a lot. One is, I think it's clear we have a lot of physicians. We have a lot of physicians in our corner, right? That come out and they know what we can do, and they can't envision practicing, in a traditional setting with high school or college or pro athletes without us, right? But the public doesn't know that. The moms and dads. One of the things, when Twitter was still out and I had a Twitter account, I started a theme once a week or so when a story came out about an AT saving someone's life, or managing a complex situation, or whenever I could leverage. I always started with, who's taking care of your kid, right? And I would post a story, say something nice about it, and say, who's taking care of your kids? And again, in my first 4 to 5 years out of as an ATC, with my license, certification, didn't have a license back then, was in high schools. I was taking care of people's kids, and I was all by myself. And did we have a team physician? Yeah. Did they ever come to games other than football? No. Did I have great communication with them? No. I had to figure a lot of stuff out, and luckily I didn't kill anybody, and I might have made some things worse that I don't know about, but nothing that I knew about did I screw up. But I was conservative. I didn't know this term back then, but I had epistemic humility. I had a good sense of knowing what I know and knowing what I didn't know, and I think that's due to the great program at Marietta College, the sports medicine program, which sadly now is gone because of higher ed and enrollment. So another great program off the books: Canisius, BU, Marietta, et cetera. Look, I think it's this. We need, as a profession, we need to shift from, quote, we deserve recognition, right? Beating our chest, we deserve, we need, we are, to here's the data proving our measurable value. And to your point, we've done things backwards. We've land grabbed, we've border jumped, and then we've developed it. So yes, we have great data now for a lot of our scope of practice stuff, with concussions and exertional hemolysis. Again, just two examples. There are others. So hopefully listeners don't minimize it and say, what about this? What about that? Yes, there are others. But there's still so much of our scope of practice that we don't have data for. We don't have national outcomes tracking. We don't have cost effectiveness data. We don't have licensure harmonization, right? So meaning across the board. So when will we be able to practice autonomously? Probably not in my lifetime. I mean, hopefully I have a few more years to go to see some change. But I don't think it's going to be in my lifetime. We're just too far away. Everything we've talked about, without rehashing everything, is still unresolved or less than ideal. It's interesting because you're starting to see the same thing happen in PT. They went to the DPT, right? Somewhat relatedly. Now there's more conversation in our field about going to the DAT. I predict that in 10 years, somehow we're at the DAT and the MSAT is old news. It's going to happen. If we don't think about it and control it, it'll happen. Kind of like the MSAT happened. But, OT has gone to the doctor. But interestingly, they still have a choice, MS or OT. They got enough pushback from their educational programs with the OTD move that they allowed both to happen, which is an interesting model. But DPT is struggling. Most people don't know that since 2017, up till 2 years ago, the latest data I have, so like a 7 or 8 year trend, PT applications are down 40%, 40% across the country. So what's happening there? Well, 2021 data set published in a 2022 paper showed that folks that get a DPT from a private school like Simmons or Ithaca College owe about an average of $138,000. If you graduate from a public school DPT program, it's around 110, 111. So that's average, right? And so when PT went to the DPT and they made subtle changes to their curriculum, one or two courses in a lot of cases, changed the letters from MSPT to DPT, they thought their salaries would go up. Again, because they thought that would bring autonomy, that would bring jurisdictional control, that would bring authority. It hasn't. Large. Again, I'm not an expert in this, but I do have a PT program here that I work with, and we're seeing some of those challenges. So PT used to be a cash cow for universities. There were 155 to 200 PT programs for a long time. Now with programs that are in candidacy, there are well over 300 accredited PT programs. So universities saw those as cash cows for enrollment, and everybody and their brother and sister started a DPT program. There are like 20 something in candidacy right now. And again, it takes about 5 years to start a program and launch it, and it costs between $500,000 and $1 million to launch it. And it's a 50-50 coin flip of whether a new academic program survives or not. So now PT is struggling because people are looking at the ROI, the salaries, the median salaries are still around 78 to 80 for PT, right? And that's not consistent with a debt of $138,000. And again, ATs, where are we? Like around 50 now, maybe 52. But again, AT is a little different because a lot of ATs are 9 or 10 month contracts. I think that's important, right? Not every AT is on a 12-month contract, so you got to adjust their salary to a 9 or 10 month work. But clearly, we're not where we should be. Now we're at the master's degree. We're adding on more debt to students. I don't know how schools like Ithaca and other private schools are going to survive, to be honest. Maybe they are. Maybe they will long term with the MSAT degree. So where are those students that used to go to PT school going now? Why are they going to PA school, right? You start a PA program, you can get 1,300 applicants for 45 spots on a heartbeat. And you can pick the 45 best students you want, and they're paying big bucks, and they're making $110,000, $120,000. So the economics of higher ed and healthcare education, people's instincts are add a new program. When I got here and we're looking at new things, people are like, let's start an MSAT, Paul. How about we start that? And I'm like, programs are dropping like flies. Programs are struggling to get their 20 enrollment, which is kind of like the average. And I said, not yet. Right now is not the time. And I wouldn't, as much as I love AT, as much as I could do it. It's obviously I did 23 years as a program director at 2 different institutions. Had great success, led some great people, and started a great program at Georgia Southern, which is still going strong now, and took over Kent Scriber's program at Ithaca, which is one of the best and oldest in the country, and I think I made it a little better. I would not even go to my provost right now and say, let's start an AT program. It's kind of one of the answers to your question about where are we and what kind of shape is the profession in. I would not start an MSAT program right now. 5 years from now, maybe. Keep my eye on it. But the challenges are just really, really, really too great and too many unknowns about what's going to happen to the profession.
Well, and that's, I learned last week that UNLV's not graduating a class this year because they were still in the crossover. So they didn't grandfather it in. So, that's 20 or so athletic trainers not entering the profession this year. And then I wanted to ask you, who was the final decision on moving to a master's program? Because when I try to create conversations online, everybody says the strategic alliance came together and made the decision, but then when you start pointing out certain details, they kind of start folding on each other. And I know there was someone that commented that one of the organizations was not involved in the master's decision. And I said, well, but the Strategic Alliance is what made the decision, and that organization is one of the 4 in the Strategic Alliance. So who's making the decisions at the end of the day? And when you talk about moving towards a DAT, who's going to be that factor to say, yeah, let's do it? Because that's where it's very confusing with these 4 separate entities trying to work together, is they're not even on the same page most of the time.
Bingo, and I don't know the answer to that question. I was told the same thing, that the Strategic Alliance did it. I think the Katie had a lot to do with it. Again, they should not be determining what the entry level degree is. The profession should. So it'd be an interesting case study. Keep an eye on it. Maybe it's 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years from now. If momentum starts to build towards a DAT, and people see that's the path to our future, that's the golden road to get us the credibility, the cultural capital that we want and deserve. How does that happen, and who says yes to it? It should be the profession should decide that our scope of practice has changed so much. We need this and we need that, right? So that was my last response to the last comment on LinkedIn on Julie's post when she asked about the MSAT. And I said, do we know if it's working yet? I don't know the answer to it. And nobody provided any counterpoints to say, well, yes, it is. Here's why. Programs have decreased, which is good. Clearly, we had way too many programs. Yes, too many programs, I think, were using AT for free labor, using the students. That should have been squashed decades ago. It got better when the internship went away and the direct supervision and those sorts of things. But still, a lot of small programs had very small AT programs. I think that is still part of the challenge. As long as AT programs continue to use their athletic facilities as their primary clinical site, it's a conflict of interest. It's a challenge. How do you get away from that? The immersion might help a little bit, but not a lot. One other thing that I wanted to put in the editorial, and I think the editor made me take it out, but maybe it was too long. Think of it this way, right? Think about the cultural capital and the AT school thing, Shelby. The Ivy Leagues, right? And the Ivy League Plus, right? Stanford's, Vanderbilt's, Rice, Emory's, Duke's, right? The military academies, the Patriot League, which is Colgate and Lafayette and Holy Cross and all those schools, the NESCACs, which are the elite liberal arts colleges in New England, right? The Notre Dames of the world, right? All of those schools that have elite academic status. How many of them have an athletic training education program?
Not really.
None of them. None of them. There might be a couple small ones. None of them. I actually looked it up 10 years ago. Think about that, right? A lot of them have med schools. A lot of them have dental schools. Duke has a great PT program. Rice has a great PT program. A lot of those schools have Northwestern, right, of the world. None of those schools have an athletic training, haven't had and don't have an athletic training program. Think about that. Right. Mm-hmm. So if elite don't see the AT profession for what we think it is enough to say, you know what, we need to have an academic degree in that. And a lot of those programs have PT, they have PA, they have OT, they have nursing, they have a lot of our cousin associations, and none of them, I won't say none because I haven't researched it in a while, but how many of them see AT as a profession worthy of starting an academic program? The answer is almost zero.
So you talked about how decision-making, how that is questionable for the profession. How is it the only thing that we get to vote on is the president of the NATA and nothing else? I mean, I know that each state has their different
district director you vote on.
Yeah. And then they also have their scope of practice or standards of practice. I've never been asked in any state that I lived in on how what are your thoughts on this initiative? Should we go after this or not? I think that's kind of a weird thought that just came across my mind.
No, there's two things, at least two, that I would mention. One is I think it's ridiculous that the NHA president is limited to 1 3-year term. And all due respect, who can get anything done substantial in 3 years? Right, AJ's doing it now. The vote's coming up for the next one. So think about it. You're elected. You got a year to get onboarded as a pre-president-elect. You got a
Mhm.
year where you're drinking water out of a fire hose, right? Learning all of the policies, all the procedures, communicating with the NHA office, communicating with the board of directors and all the district directors, yada, yada, yada. Your second year, you probably figured things out and you're starting to do some stuff. Now you're getting exhausted by the end of year two. Year three, you're on the way out, right? It's what business, what industry can work? Can a university work with somebody every 3 years and turn over the presidency? I think it is asinine, might be too strong of a word. I think the first thing we need to do is it should be a 5-year term and that person should be eligible to run again. If you get somebody that finally gets something done in year 4, year 5, we got to say goodbye. Or in our case now, year 2, year 3, we have to say goodbye to that person. They can't run
Mhm.
again. I don't get that. How does anybody get anything done of substance? Number one. Number two, from what I've read, I'm really encouraged by the description and the bio of our current executive director. Her name escapes my memory at the moment, but
Molly.
Molly, she actually has a pedigree that's like, okay, I think she can get some stuff done. I think we took a little too long to make a move there. I don't know what happened, but um, I think we needed a change a long time ago in the ED position.
Mhm.
Um, I think to the credit, they've made some minor changes to who can run for president, but I still don't think that's enough. Why are there 6 qualifications you have to have? You should have to have been an athletic trainer for 10 years and make your case. Right? If
Yeah.
you're a member for 10 years, plug a number. If you're a member for the NHA for 10 years and you want to be president, why can't you run a campaign? Why can't I get up there right now? Right now, I could probably run because I was a chair of a national committee. I didn't read them close enough because I'm retired. I'm still a member, but I'm retired. My license, my certification, right? It's too restrictive, and so it's largely a thankless job. So who's going to make bold decisions in 3 years? Who can get anything bold done in 3 years? I don't think anybody can. I mean, we had some
Yeah.
great people do good things, yes, but it's running a baton, handing the baton, a relay race every 3 years. Here you go. Oh, thanks. What are the issues? I don't think that makes sense. So, because of your last part of your question about having input and having a vote, is when I started the educationalist community, and Tori Lindley was the president. And I had this idea, and I did the ECE wasn't doing what it was supposed to do, right? All of the education committees, the PEC, the ECE, all the other ones, they were fragmented, they weren't cohesive. They had purpose, they all did things, but there was no body for educators, right? We had at that time 270 accredited programs. Therefore, we had 270 program directors, 270 clinical education coordinators. Every program had to have at least 3 faculty. So 270 third faculty members, right? At 270 institutions, which means you also had chairs and deans that had interest in the AT program, right? So multiply all that times 270. You have at least 270 times 5, right? That their job is to make sure the AT education program is good and doing what it's supposed to do. And it's costing money and yada, 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 right? But we had no common voice. We had no outlet. We had nothing. So I did some research. The APTA at that time had, I think, 5, don't quote me on it, but maybe it was 4, 5 different special interest groups that were related to educators. They have an academy of educators, OT, PA, all of our sister, brother, cousin healthcare professions had specific um, teams, groups, committees, whatever you want to call them, right? SIGs, special interest groups for educators, not committees like for professional educators, the types we had. So I went to
Mhm.
Tori Lindley and I said, hey, I showed it to him. He goes, wow. And I said, look, connect that with how the MSAT went, where none of us really, most of us had a voice and weren't even aware of how to your point, who approved it? How did it happen? Why are we doing this? I said, that's a problem. We, we, we are the future of the profession. We, the education programs. Without us, the profession dies on the vine. We are charged with incorporating evidence, promoting competence, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's our job. And no one's listening to us. And we have very little representation. And at that time, there were no program directors on the board of directors. Right. So who is bringing the educator voice? Which, think about the relevance and importance of the educational body. So I pitched them the idea of an educator community or academy. It turned out to be educationalist community. There was some political wrangling there. The NHA wanted that to be for everybody, which was, to be blunt, was a give back on my part. That was not my intention when I drew up the blueprint and Tori approved and drove it through the board and got it approved. But I got pushback that we didn't want to exclude anybody. It's kind of another example about the strategic alliance and being too careful about alliances and relationships. This was designed for the educators to be able to get back control of the standards and competencies, to get back control of our degree and our future, all of those things. And it got watered down into this educationalist community, but we moved forward, we compromised, we moved to get it approved, we moved forward, we had a good start, we had a great committee of established, we had over 200 years of experience in the original committee of educators, program directors, researchers, you name it. And we did some decent things. And then my term was coming to an end and I was done. And guess what? Right now, the educationalist community is gone. It doesn't exist anymore. I don't know how that happened, but it's gone. And they consolidated all those other committees into basically the ECE supercharged. And I don't know what that's doing because, again, I'm not paying attention to that anymore. But the SIG, we created a special interest group for educators to have a voice so that I didn't have to write a petition, or Bill Prentice didn't have to write a petition. He wrote a petition too about the MSAT. That got like 1,000 signatures. That went all over the place, right? So we had 2 petitions about the MSAT degree that were basically ignored. So that was part of the genesis of the educationalist community idea, which now no longer exists. So what is the voice of the educator body in the NHA? I don't know. How do they rise up and resist a potential hypothetical DAT movement? I don't know. Who's president when that happens? Who knows? What does that person do about it? Who decides? I think the NHA should have an explicit movement to, this is my personal opinion, to get the standards back from the competency, excuse me. Katie controls the standards, to get the competencies back. Those are ours. They used to be copyrighted by the NHA. How did they get them? The NHA had copyright ownership over this competencies for decades. The PEC had them. The ECE had them. If you go back and pull an old copy up, it says copyright NETA. The Katie has them now. Why? So when the Katie decides in 2 years to add more competencies, to add, I don't know, orthotics and prosthetics fitting, right? Something that's a particular field. They get it approved on some committee level. Boom. If you're a program director of an MSAT, you got a year or 2 to incorporate it in your curriculum. Do we have the evidence for that? Do we have the authority to do that? Or are we just saying we're going to do it because we can? And to your early point, I lost the track on this because we got so much going on, which is great. Right? Every time we add competencies, state practice acts have to change.
Yep.
Who has the time and money to update the Practice Act? Because now we've been told that we should be able to do dry needling or diagnostic ultrasound, or therapeutic ultrasound is a new thing. We have a lab here, biomedical ultrasound is being used for, it's actually some research going on with biomedical ultrasound applied transcranially for concussions, right? So let's say if 5 years from now that evidence emerges to, this is the best way to treat, I'm being hypothetical, this is the best way. These parameters, transcranial ultrasound for acute concussion, reduces symptoms, increases return to play, yada, yada, yada. Solid evidence. Guess what's going to happen? AT's going to be like, hey, I got an ultrasound machine down in the clinic. I can do that. Again, this is totally hypothetical, but if we don't think in hypotheticals, then we're not prepared. What happens when transcranial ultrasound, again, hypothetical, becomes best practice for treating acute concussions, sport concussion, MTBI? How do ATs grab a hold of that? That we can do it. And then ultrasound techs and physicians who are doing it say, no, you can't do it. Oh, yes, we can. It's in our standards. It's in our KD guidelines. It's in my curriculum. I learned how to do it. I passed the national exam, right? That's maybe hyperbolic, but that's an example of what we've done time and time again, where we are now with this huge body of knowledge that is not necessarily ours, right? That we don't necessarily have data for to substantiate and uphold our authority. And so how do we get the cultural capital where we don't have to say, it's not trainer, it's athletic trainer. And then, oh, okay, sorry, it's athletic trainer. Well, what is that again? And how's that different than a personal trainer or a horse trainer, right? And we know all the memes, right, associated with trainer, those sorts of things. I think if before I die, we don't have to do that anymore, then somebody's done something right.
True, I would say so. So with the research and evidence that we need, I mean, working in the hospital at Pennsylvania, I mean, those physicians, they were trying to grab as much information as they could to try to create, their articles and journal submissions, all that type of stuff. I have never been really pressured to apply myself to create research from my clinical practice. Do you think that's something that we need to change and make more robust in our clinical practice, or do you think there's, I guess, no point to it? I don't know why there wouldn't be a point, but
Well,
I've
there's a couple groups out there, like I think it's AARBN. I don't like have the acronym wrong. It's out in Arizona, right? That collects data, I think, mostly on secondary schools. And there's some other people doing great work. But certainly, if there were more centralized depositories and standardized ways of looking at outcomes for what we do, it would expedite things.
Mhm.
You know, we're so far behind in substantiating our scope of our competence and our expertise and the lag that we've talked about, that it's probably going to be impossible for the academics, the PhDs out there to catch up. You know, Jeff Dryban is doing great work at the Osteoarthritis Institute, looking at arthritis rates as it relates to sport injury, right, and acute joint injury and long-term injury and those sorts of things on a very high level. Folks are doing great work in concussions and secondary impact syndrome, et cetera. But who's doing it on sport nutrition? All right, who's collecting outcome data on how well ATs are counseling on sport nutrition? Who's collecting data on how well ATs are recognizing and managing mental health issues and eating disorders? Who's doing it on, you know, plugging it on suturing and joint reductions and, you know, outcomes, right? So that's the problem, is we've grabbed so much land in terms of knowledge and competence, and we've not thought enough about expertise. We're thinking about competence, and we have to think about we are experts in, and here's why. That's what it boils down to. Not, hey, we've learned this. This is our degree, and I'm competent in it. And I graduated from a degree, and I graduated from an accredited program, which says I'm competent. I've seen somebody do it, and I've done it once. Right? Think about watching The Pit, right? A TV show, and looking at the intense, you know, nature of what they do in that scenario. Think of an AT, right? Who've seen it done and done it once. Are they expert in it? Do we have the data to show they're experts so that we can say, hey, we can do that, right? And that relates back to the billing. We haven't even talked about billing, right? It relates back to the billing. Nobody's going to pay us for something unless we have that data. Insurance company or a person cash, right, would be a fool to pay us to do something if we're collecting cash, an AT that's on a cash business plan, a concierge, you know, I'll travel to you and you pay me cash. So we're behind on that. Have we caught up? Yes. So do people doing great work? Yes. Do we have a long way to go? Yes. So I think we have to reassess and really look in the mirror and go, who are we? What is our scope of practice? What should we be focusing on? And we really need to think long and hard about expanding our patient populations or our skill set, domain of practice, body of knowledge, any of those things, any of those metrics you want to use. We have to think long and hard, and that includes going to a new degree. And we better not even think about going to the DAT for at least 10 years. And if the MSAT is not working, then we should never go to DT. That doesn't mean eliminate them, right? A lot of people, there's like 12 of them now, I think. People are getting them in leadership and research and clinical practice. It's great. I'm not saying don't do a DAT. If programs are successful and ATs that are lifelong learners want to get a DAT because they're stale or they want leadership or they want some healthcare management expertise or they want to teach, and universities will hire them, fine, 100%. But we better not be going to the DAT as the entry-level degree, which, by the way, some people don't like that term anymore, but it is what it is, right? The MSAT right now is the entry-level degree. You need this degree to sit for the boards in order to enter practice. I was actually told by somebody, I think from Katie a few years ago, not to use entry-level anymore. I was like, why? What's wrong with it, right? So that's a waste of time. That's a waste of a conversation of energy. We you know, PT's retracting a little bit. PT's struggling. There's conversations now. Is PT degree too long because of the debt and ROI? Should we shorten it? There's an article published in the PT Education Journal a couple last fall about, you know, a rhetorical kind of controversial question. Should we retract a little bit? And they're starting to feel that pain because they've not gotten the authority that they want. Again, they're starting to get differences in states where they can order x-rays now. My wife's working on a transitional DPT, and she has an intense 3-credit pharmacology course. And it's boring, it's dry, she's struggling through it. She's got 40 years experience as a PT, and she's sitting there going, I need like 10% of this. Right? So she has all this experience. She's a PTAT, by the way. She's worked in clinics and administration, and now she's teaching in a PTA program, and she's working on her transitional DPT, and she's taking this laborious pharmacology course. And she's going, I can't do this in my practice in Massachusetts. Why am I doing this? So, like, when do we get to that point where a 3-credit pharmacology course is required in an MSAT program? pharmacology is required, and I had to teach it. And I'm like, why am I teaching this level of depth? ATs can't do pharmacology. Again, I'm not saying some people will flip this around. I'm not saying ignorance is bliss. But, again, pharmacology things, I'm not going to be stepping over that line. I'm calling the doctor or the PA or the NP before I
That's
do
why you have
anything.
physician oversight at the end of the day.
Correct. Right.
They're
it's
signing off on
clearly
the
their scope of
physicals.
practice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that's where. So I was a master's level student before the transition. And the reason I did it, because I thought it would be a competitive edge entering the profession of, I'd say a specialization rather than just an, entry level undergraduate certification. So for us to take that away and not take advantage of the different levels, I think is where I have a lot of hardship with it. Is at this moment, I feel that we have a low supply of athletic trainers and a high demand. We've worked so hard to get us into these different cracks and crevices. I mean, the military is going to hire 300 to 500 athletic trainers by 2030.
Wow.
We don't have enough athletic trainers for that, and they want the prerequisite of like 3 years of experience before entering the military setting. So the NATA or whoever in the strategic alliance needs to get ahead of that and figure out a contingency plan on how to meet that demand. Or else, a lot of these institutions, it's a use it or lose it kind of mentality. If we can't fill it, then we have to figure out something else to do. I think that it should have transitioned to almost a vocational undergrad athletic training degree of emergency care. And then you go on to the master's to start specialization of whatever setting you want to work into. Currently now we have the specialization certificates that are starting to come out from the BOC, so the orthopedic specialist certification for the hospitals. So I feel that we've added a bunch of layers where we could have streamlined the already established curriculum. And the other problem that the master's programs are encountering is that they're spending so much time teaching the master's level students how to be students. That's the problem with education right now, is we have a lot of people just pushing through and not actually retaining any knowledge or reasoning how to take in knowledge, apply it. So now we're at a catch-22 of we're pushing master level students that aren't master level students. They're not at that level of education where they can retain a healthcare professional's competency in 2 years. So we're going to keep increasing the demand because we've done a good job of infiltrating athletic trainers, but we're not putting out the quality anymore. And COVID, I think all programs should have paused because it's a hands-on profession. And we had at least a year and a half where the students could not get hands-on experience, in-person experience. And it showed. I mean, working at Pennsylvania Hospital, I had newly certified athletic trainers that didn't know how to tape a hand to do casting. So their angles and everything were horrible for casting. And that's public marketing, is if we're not able to apply a cast nicely, why would you're going to lose customers that way. So I got overburdened of being the cast specialist because I had the experience when I should have been able to rely on my other athletic trainers and have an expectation of where their skills should be, since even though we don't want to concentrate on the taping as a definition of what an athletic trainer is, it is still the bread and butter of what we are achieving in our day-to-day practice. So I just think that I like the master's, I like the doctorate, but I see those as specializations rather than the entry-level base knowledge that is setting a precedence for the profession. So that's my 2 cents on the whole thing.
There's a lot to unpack there, but you bring another few great points into the conversation. Is think about what we wiped out, right? And aggressively moving to the master's degree. We had 12 to 15 advanced master's programs, Carolina, Kentucky, Delaware, AT Still, et cetera, UVA and others, right? That produced a lot of fantastic professionals and scholars, right? So did they produce enough? No. But a lot of the PhD folks we have doing the research, collecting our data now, came from those routes at UVA, at Chapel Hill, at Kentucky, Delaware. I know, for example, again, I'm sorry for my East Coast bias, but that's where I've lived my whole life. And there are others, right?
Mhm.
And so one concern that was brought up when we went to the master's degree and eliminated the post-professional master's is where are the next generations of our research is going to come from, right? UConn is another one. So I don't know if those numbers have dropped, but I do know that the post-professional masters of those places were incubators for scholarly inquiry and research. And then once those programs are connected, people stayed. A lot of people at UVA went to the master's and stayed for the PhD. Chapel Hill now is that way. They didn't go there maybe without intention. Several of my students, right? Carolyn Lissay, who's getting the new investigator award, was one of my Ithaca students. Very proud. She went practiced in high school for a couple of years and then called and she went to grad school at UVA and then boom, got her PhD and now she's a rock star. Right. So again, there's other ways of doing things, but think about everything we lost. We lost really, and now what we're doing now, right? We have residencies and fellowships. A lot of push. Go to residency, go to fellowship. Let's copy the medical model and or the PT model. I don't know how well it's working, but can students do a master's degree and then afford to do a residency or a fellowship somewhere and take less than a full salary, move there for a year, work their butt off 60 hours a week, whatever, for less than a full salary, and then find a job in order to advance their skills a little bit? I don't know. Seems like an odd economic model to me. Now the BOC is doing these specialties, and orthopedics is the first one. I got to dig at that a little bit. I would argue that all ATs that are certified in graduate credit programs should be an orthopedic expert already. That's probably what we do most across any setting, right? So why do we start with ortho? Why don't we start with maybe emergency medicine? Why don't we start with mental health, right? Again, I know those are coming, I think. I remember reading some of that. Yeah. And I'm not anti, not bad. I'm just thinking, is this the best thing we should be doing? One alternative that was thrown out there by others, and then I latched onto it, so it wasn't my original idea, is hold on a minute. And you talked about it a little bit. There's two ways we could have done this differently without the master's degree that maybe would have saved us a lot of time, trouble, and energy. One is let's not destroy the post-professional masters. Let's provide resources to double the number of them, right? Mm-hmm. And or more, or triple them over 10 years. Let's triple the post-professional masters. We have a lot of R1 universities that have the resources in biomechanics and kinesiology and sports medicine, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that could have developed a post-professional master's degree, right? And then relate that to a phased license program, which I think you alluded to earlier. You graduate from an accredited BSAT, you have a level 1 license. You've got 5 years to get a level 2 license. You either do that through a post-professional master's or some kind of tutored, mentored program somewhere, like the residencies and fellowships we have now. And then you take a second level exam and you have the choice to go into a specialization like other fields do. And we could have kept those post-professional and masters and what they do, the great things they do for us, have done for us. And we could have built upon that and leveraged that direct experience, a mentorship experience, and a phased license program. Because of, I don't know if that was ever talked about, because of the way the MSAT was done, because it was largely done in a back room and a white paper emerged, like, whoa. And go back and look at that white paper. There's like 12 or 15 names on it. How many of them are educators? Again, so a few, 2 or 3. And again, no disrespect to non-educators. It doesn't mean they don't have value and they didn't contribute to that process. But if you're going to change the degree and you're going to overthink it and have a distribution of folks that are Division I head athletic trainers, all due respect, right? Doesn't mean they don't have value and contributions, but you're relying on head ATs and assistant directors of sports, right? To drive the degree change, and you have 1 or 2 program directors that have actually been in the trenches educating and gotten outcomes and maybe has done scholarship in health professions ed. It's just so myopic. It's mind-boggling. I just can't believe that we did that. It was that we did that. It's just, and that was what was so tough for me to swallow. And that's where the petition that I talked about came from.
Yeah. Well, and I think that we've increased the cost for marketing of athletic training also to get people into the program, is that we have amazing high school sports medicine programs. So we're getting kids excited at that, what do I want to do with my life phase of life. Now we've obliterated 4 years of undergraduate that could, you go in, yeah, this is what I'm going to do. No, I don't. Easy loss because I'm still getting an undergraduate degree. Now they have to wait 4 years and then they get into the master's and then they're like, Mom, maybe this wasn't what I wanted to do. Or they get picked up by PAs, physical therapy, occupational, all these other specialties because they have a more robust understanding of what it is when it's being promoted in those undergraduate areas.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. They also, we had Ithaca 4 years, right? And really the core was 3 years, but there was a pre-year the first year. Well, but the key, Shelby, and you're nailing it, is they had time and space to make mistakes. They had time and space to get confidence. We had a very intentional pull you along, and our goal was by spring of year 4 to make you confident and competent. And in that was a very structured, progressive clinical ed plan. We integrated clinical reasoning throughout clinical ed and didactic intentionally. They got diversity of experiences, and 80 to 85% of our students met the bar. And we had 5 to 7 students every fall sophomore semester, which was their first real year in the program, that we were like, I don't know if those people are going to make it. And then you would see them in the spring. Okay. And then you would see them in the fall of the junior year, be like, boom. I could rattle up name after name of people that you had doubts about in the beginning of sophomore year, the first real part of the program, and where they got to in their senior year. And we look at the outcomes that Ithaca had and others, right, that had these kinds of great comprehensive programs that really did it well. And it was a process. It was putting something in the oven and leaving it there and checking it and tweaking it and seasoning it and tasting it, right? And Thanksgiving dinner, right? Took all day to cook, kind of magnified. And all of a sudden, to be smacked in the face, like, hey, you're going to a master's degree. And now we're like, okay, as a private school that's expensive, how are we going to do this and to keep our doors open, right? Not just from an Ithaca college standpoint, it's like, how are we going to keep Ithaca's AT program open? It's been around for 50 years. It's one of the best in the program we've done in the country. We've done a great job, blah, 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 we're beating our chest. To how are we going to continue to produce great clinicians for the profession, right? So this double-edged intersected problem there. Economics of getting students in and keeping the program open so that people have jobs. And so Ithaca College's program, again, I'm localizing to one program I'm very familiar with, obviously, right? And it goes to others. And then 2, we did a great job making clinicians better, making great clinicians for the AT profession. How do we do that? And that's, I struggled with both of those when I was the director. And I brought the conversation to the faculty saying, are we going to do this, gang? Are we going to stick in the game? We're going to stay in the game and do the master's degree. And we voted as a team and they voted yes. But we all knew this ain't going to be easy. How do we keep the program open financially, economics with the college, and keep everybody employed here? And how do we keep doing this amazing work that Kent Scriber and his folks, Cindy Trowbridge and Jackie Kingma and Courtney Gray and all these other folks that have been there for a long time, and continue the legacy of Ithaca College AT education and the 500 or 600 alumni we have now doing all sorts of amazing things in research and administration, and med school, you name it. How do you do that in 2 years? It's literally cutting the program by a third, and they added more stuff.
Well, and I think it's even, as I was at the panel at the BOC, learning that each program sets their standards on prerequisites. So we have people blindly going through their undergraduate and then figuring out, I think I want to do athletic training. And then, the standards are all different on which school you're going to enter for your master's program. I think there needs to be more guidance on the prereqs of, I do think that there should be a business class in there somewhere to help progress the profession, because we just don't have space in the master's program. And I think that's one of the missing pieces in where our profession is going, is even at the NATA, I would love a business-minded person to actually come in and clean up how we're marketing, how we're promoting, all these different things to help streamline. We're just kind of healthcare professionals pretending to be business people. And I think that's what's kind of hindered our growth, is we're not actively looking at where we're going to get the most bang for our buck and, advocate to get into areas where we're going to get paid adequately. I don't think that the traditional route of or traditional setting of athletic training at the college levels the business structure doesn't make sense. You can talk all you want about NIL and Division I, but that's only a percentage of people in traditional setting. The high school and D2, D3, the business structure just doesn't work. And that's why I think it's slowly dying and people are leaving, because there is no change and there's no resources, or there are resources, but not robust enough resources to go out and educate the HR department, the athletic department on why we need to be paid a certain way, or even restructuring the athletic training department to be a part of the healthcare facility on campus. I don't know why we're still employed by the athletic department in most cases. It doesn't make sense if we're healthcare providers.
Yeah, the medical model still hasn't taken off, right? Still is not universal. The business class idea is brilliant. I could go off for a long time because I did a lot of research on Flexner's competencies and the original medical model. And, you look at, the PT Purex, the classic, 8 hours of physics, 8 hours of biology, 8 hours of chemistry, yada, yada, right? When has anybody studied those and actually shown that they're effective and meaningful, right? Versus just a paradigm of practice that we've inherited. And that's largely what AT did. And I raised that question. I said, what's the rationale? And again, I was being a little rhetorical, pushing the needle a little bit. What's the rationale for requiring 8 hours of physics, biology, chemistry? Well, because they're hard sciences. Okay, I know. But what is the rationale? Does that predict a better AT student, or does it mean you can't get through an AT curriculum without going through all 24 of those credit hours? The MCATs finally figured things out 12 years ago or so. The old MCATs was still calculus-based physics and mostly organic chemistry, biology, and physics, right? Now they realize that's not the best way to produce a physician, right? Brilliant scientists, mathematically inclined people can do all that stuff. They become great researchers and drug developers and those sorts of things, right? But can they talk to humans? Can they communicate? Do they have compassion? So now you've got psychology and statistics and other aspects of the social sciences, and they've taken away, except for a couple institutions, calculus-based physics. So they evolved. They're still heavy, right? What is anybody collecting data on these prereqs? What are the correlations between students' grades and prereqs? What about a student who goes to a small college and there's 20 people in his physics 1 and 2 classes and has a really good teacher versus someone who goes to a state school and has 150, 200 people in their Chem 1, Chem 2 and has somebody who English is a second language and they're a brilliant chemist and maybe they're not a great teacher. And you're panicking to get a B, right? In Chem 1 and Chem 2 so that you can get accepted to an AT program, right?
Yeah.
What are we doing with that? I think it's lazy to simply say, here, put these prerequisites in. What was the scientific rationale behind that? Do we need a little chemistry, biology, and physics in what we do? Sure. But you know what happens? And again, I was an educator for 23 years. We teach it all over again. Anatomy and physiology, the core scientific course for all of what we do. Do students get an A in anatomy, physiology 1 and 2, and then we simply just go, we run with it? No. What happens in your ortho class, in your PNC classes, in your gen mech? We teach it all over again. You guys remember this? Oh, not kind of, right? We know this. Cognitive science, long-term memory, short-term memory. Students don't remember. Students cram to get that A in anatomy 1 and 2. They cram overnight for 8 hours in order to pass the cadaver practical exam. Right? Does that transfer? Big word. Does that transfer into memory and application for orthopedics 1 and orthopedics 2, what I taught for 20-something years? No. I had to teach it all over again. So anybody who's taught in the trenches for a while will tell you that just having students take prerequisites and get a C or a B or whatever you want does not translate into a better AT student and a more efficient and a more optimal AT education, just like it doesn't in PT, just like it doesn't in med school. The data's out there, right? Health professional educations have been studying this stuff for a long time. We didn't study it. We didn't talk about it. We went to the master's degree. Somebody at the KD determined what the prereqs are. Somebody at the KD determined that everything has to happen at the graduate level. Somebody made all those rules. A small committee, I say somebody. A small group of people made all of these decisions without talking to folks who've been in the trenches and or who've studied it and has the data and has the chops, which is sad and problematic. We could have done this a lot better. So yeah, a business class would be amazing, would be an amazing addition because there is no room in the curriculum for it. How do you negotiate all the stuff that you're talking about, all the stuff that Julie Cavalier is talking about, negotiating salaries, and people saying this. And again, go back to one of my earlier comments. There's tons of comments in those conversations like educators need to do it. I'm sorry, no, we can't. It's a 2-year degree with a 10-mile wide curriculum. We don't have the experience, the expertise to do it. It's another, I don't have the experience, the expertise to teach business stuff. When I was an AT educator, can I do some stuff in negotiation now? Well, yeah, I've been a dean for 5 years, right? And so I've been part of enough hirings that I have a little bit, but I don't have any formal training in it. And I have no formal training in the business side. So, but no, there's no room for that to happen.
Yeah. Well, and I would even ask to get research on the efficacy of online learning because I'm teaching anatomy and physiology at the community college. And I'm like, okay, I mean, it's open book technically, but like how much recall are you actually able to take from what you're studying? And, the short answer questions, they weren't able to make it through for 10 minutes allotted for each question. And it was just like, you should have had some recall to be able to answer at least one sentence of this. But if you weren't able to recall anything, then you're paying for nothing in this class, to be honest. And then also, we talked about research and like even third-party reimbursement. I'd even take it a step further of research on the efficacy of treatment plans. Like how quickly are you able to get somebody back and how are the outcomes afterwards? I know Kevin at Preventex has created programming to try to pull some of that information from our documentation, but how have we never evaluated how good the athletic trainer is actually performing these skills? And on top of the third party portion of it, everybody wants universal healthcare, socialized healthcare. Athletic trainers are doing it, but nobody's actually gaining research on how well, what are the outcomes of being able to see a medical provider 5 times a week? And, are the outcomes of function, performance, healing rate? Like we're not doing any of that data for the general public either. And we are the best petri dish to test those things out. So if we can show that, we all know that insurance at ACL injuries or surgeries, like that's kind of a dead end because the insurance is only going to get you to 100%, but that 100% is where they tore their ACL. So how are we not creating more data points to show that insurance is not doing a service to the patient, and that when they get that extra care from the athletic trainer, or they're working directly with the athletic trainer with more touch points, that they are actually coming back better and are reducing the risk of re-tearing their ACL. So it's just, I don't think we've put ourselves in a position in the public health system to show how much information and influence we have in the medical space. And that's where I think we're doing a big disservice.
That's a great example of the difference between competence and expertise. So again, competence is, let's blow this up a little bit. Competence is like, I know Shelby, if you were a student in my program, I know Shelby's competent. Someone would say, how so? Because I have documentation of, I've seen her do this, and this, and based on my judgment and my experience, blah, blah, she's competent. I've approved, I've authorized, I've checked her off, whatever you want to call it, right? So I know you're competent in the things I've seen you do. Have you done everything within the scope of practice? Is it possible that I've seen you do everything within the scope of practice of an AT? No,
possibly
right?
not.
Because it's impossible. Right? Yeah. Now, the ideologically, you've had 3 or 4 clinical instructors, supervisors, preceptors over the course of your clin ed, and you've had 5 or 6 faculty, right? So aggregate all of your experiences, real, simulated, test, didactic, lab, right? A well-oiled designed curriculum covers as many bases as possible and aggregates that. That's called programmatic assessment. Some subjective, some objective, some real, some simulated, some tests, some paper, some book, whatever, right? That's what a really good comprehensive program does. And if someone has a programmatic assessment approach, they aggregate all that data, multiple sources, some objective, some subjective, and it's formative, a combination of formative and summative, et cetera, right? So at the end of the day, I've validated in some way, shape, or form that you're competent in this body of set of skills and knowledges and competencies, right? And then ideologically, the exam is the bow on the top of that, right? Is the candle on the cake, right? That says you've done this. However, what about things that we haven't seen you do? How do I know you can do things I haven't seen you do, right? Mm-hmm. And think about the nature of AT education. A large part, despite changes in the immersion and all stuff, a large part of your clin ed is what? Standing around watching practices and watching games.
Yeah.
Right? Nobody's really talked about that enough. That's the fundamental difference between us and nursing and PT and OT. When a PT student goes to a clin ed, they're doing 40 hours a week or more, 40 hours a week of clinical, 35, whatever it is, 8 to 5, 9 to 5. They're treating patients and doing notes and talking to their preceptor. When they go home, they're exhausted. We go home sometimes, we're frozen, we're wet, right? We're like bored because the coach talked for an hour before practice, right? Some of these things have changed, and I'm showing some of my old school, yes, right? So there's such a low saturation level of experience and learning in much of AT Clin Ed. There's no way around it, right? We finally, there's still people that count hours as part of the Clin Ed, right? One of the core components of competency-based education is that it's time variable, not time dependent, right? The internship used to have 1,500 hours, right? The accredited programs used to have 800 hours. That's time dependent. That's assuming that in 800 hours, right? So it was controversial, even in Ithaca, as progressive as we were, with some of our preceptors, when I said we're doing away with hours. We're not having students record hours anymore. We're taking hours out of the syllabus because that's time dependent. And I'm like, we can't be a CBE program if we're going to count hours. It's that simple. Some people argue, well, but, right? If you have other things. But as soon as someone says, did you get your number of hours? Did you get your 8 hours in for this Clin Ed? How many hours did you get this week? As soon as you use that language, your mind, your paradigm of practice is based on time dependency. All right? Competency-based education is time variable. So if we think about the nature of how this works, there's a lot of infrastructure and a lot of obstacles already in the way of moving students into a high level of competency. But the other thing about competency is it means on any given day, right, you pass that exam, you pass the BOC, you could take it again next week and you fail it, right? So there's a variability aspect to it. It means you're competent on that day that you were assessed. What I become interested in the last few years is capability-based education. How do we know you can do things that I haven't seen you do? When you come across an injury that you learned in a textbook, you took a test on, but you haven't seen clinically. Let's say rhabdo, let's say exertional hyponatremia. You know what it is, you passed a test, but have you ever seen it? Right?
Yeah.
I know cardiac, I had to teach sudden cardiac death for 10 years in pathophysiology 1 and 2. I know everything about commotio cordis, ARBD, congenital abnormalities, HCM. I've never seen it happen. Right? How would I react when it happens? I don't know. Am I capable? So I'm competent because I passed the exam. In my case, I taught it over and over again. But am I capable, right, of handling that? So you look at it now, a 2-year program of study, and how many clinical ed experiences in that 2 years? Arguably a third less than it used to be when it was a 3-year bachelor's program. How do we know students are capable and competent? That's kind of where I was going with my scholarship before I got out of faculty and got into higher ed, and where I still pay attention to a lot of medical education stuff. To me, the secret sauce is, what are you capable of doing? What can you do that I haven't seen you do? If I'm going to hire you, Shelby, to be the AT at my high school where my kids are at, right? I want to know, are you capable of handling stuff you haven't seen before on your own? And I always told my students who knew they had to get a letter of recommendation from me at graduation time for jobs or grad school, I told them, if I can write a letter about you that says I would let you take care of my kids at a high school on your own, you've crossed that. I don't care what your GPA is.
Yeah.
If you can care for my kids, a high school group of kids, without supervision, without a doctor there, without a more experienced AT there, you've won the golden ticket. If you can't, if I can't say that about you for whatever reason, right? You may have a 4.0, a 3.8, you may have the highest national score in the BOC exam, right? You're a good test taker, right? You're a good knowledge displayer, but are you competent and capable? So that's the difference, right? Do we have the data to show that we have expertise in these things? Not that we have a body of knowledge. We can't just simply say we have this body of knowledge. I'm trained in this. I'm competent in this, and which is right easy to say, but where's the proof in the pudding?
Well, I'd even say like CPR. Like I've never had to perform it, knock on wood, in my career so far. But my partner at FIU DAT, she's concentrating on trying to break that stigma of, okay, yeah, it's a 2-year requirement to get recertified. So is that really enough? Or like, is that too long of a time between certifications or recertifications to really know how to utilize that skill? So she's pushing out that, there should be a quarterly practice within your department or your team or whatever it needs to be. And then she's also taken it a level further of, everybody hates the CPR recertification, but I don't think they've made it interesting enough for medical providers to take it, that they're actually taking away new ideas or new skills from it, so that they're like, oh wow, like that's a cool new way to think about it, and that applies into my practice much easier. So she's trying to change the education of CPR and really promote that athletic trainers are actually running through simulations at their departments so that they're better prepared, because we know that seconds make a difference in those cardiac conditions, in the response of it. And it's also interesting that you brought up ARVD. I actually have ARVD. That's why I retired from athletics and went into athletic training. Is 19 years old, I was getting ready for preseason and I collapsed and had an ICD put in the next day, and my sister has one too. My mom carries the gene, and then one of my cousins has it also. So it's one of the sudden cardiac death issues that people don't really understand how prevalent it is.
Yeah. Do you have family lineage to the Veneto region of Italy, which might be old data, but I remember learning that the DNA lineage, it's very prominent in that area of Italy.
Yeah, I haven't looked into that lineage. I'm mostly German and like English, Great Britain area, United Kingdom. So kind of offshoot. But yeah, my uncle died of it when he was 28 going on a run. They knew he had it, but in the 80s it was still kind of a, how do you treat it long term? And the medication just gave him so many symptoms that he didn't do the medication as well as he could have.
Wow. Sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
Yeah, they migrated a lot back then in Europe. So it'd be interesting if you ever did Move 23 to see, do you have DNA back there? Because that was one of the fascinating parts about studying that when I was teaching it.
Yeah. I'm hoping to do an episode with my parents, because you don't get to hear the side of the parents and dealing with it afterwards. And then even the hardships that I had with all of reintegrating into college and all that.
That'd be a great show. That'd be a great one.
Yeah.
I think, the key is, I know we're probably going to wrap this up. We can talk for the rest of the weekend, but we might chop this into two issues. But, it's 2026, right? Professional authority is one of the things, I think one of the themes we're talking about. It's not granted by the degree, right? So the MSAT has pluses, has minuses, but the DPT, same, right? There's a lot of controversy going on. There's a lawsuit in California about the medical association out there suing an MP who insists on calling herself doctor. And this conversation started to come up again with PT about, should you call yourself a doctor to your patients? Again, it's a clinical degree, blah, blah, blah. And I don't know if it's happening yet in DAT circles, but it will. But authority isn't granted by degrees alone. All right. I think that's a really important message, maybe a good closing point. Yeah. It's earned through outcomes. It's reinforced through law, our practice acts that we talked about, and it's sustained through policy. And so I think athletic training's future depends on engaging all three of those, and none of them are easy. And all of them have intersections and roots in our educational system, in our evidence, in our research, in our policies. It goes back to a lot of your great points about the strategic alliance and who's doing what. It goes back to our struggles with media and or public perceptions, trainers versus whatever else. So, we've covered a lot of territory here. I don't know if we've created more questions than answers, and we haven't even gotten as deep, but these are the sorts of questions that I tried to ask in some of the papers that my colleagues and I wrote and that I put out there in some of my presentations. They're uncomfortable. They're messy. They're systems-based issues. Reductionism won't address any of them. But I think we really have to think about outcomes, law, and policy, the intersection of those, especially now that we might be considered not a profession anymore by the education department and the government, right? And if nursing and PT are getting hit with that, what chance do we have of winning a battle with the government about, not putting us on that list?
Yeah. Yep. Well, I mean, I don't think we solved any of the world's problems, but hopefully it's, thoughtful for if the DAT does come up again on if that needs to be required. I just think that will water down the compensation conversation and all the progress that we've made. Yeah, we can keep saying that we're elevating our education, we deserve more, but you're not really letting people run and create more opportunities if we keep increasing the standard, even though that sounds really bad. But I just, with the increase of standard, I don't think it's really progressing our education competencies and quality that we're putting out.
Correct. That's the key is, I'm a little relieved that I'm not a program director anymore, to be honest. I mean, and I mean that. I mean, we're so proud of the program that we built at Ithaca and the outcomes we're getting, and the pressure and stress to duplicate that with 1/3 less time and arguably 15-20% more content and skills. I didn't leave the profession because of that, but it certainly, to be honest, made it easier when the opportunity for me to become an associate dean here and then now a dean. Thinking about the last phase of my career, what am I going to do? I was a program director for 23 years, doing the same job, 2 different places. Really, really worked hard to advance the profession by educating better, borrowing, stealing from medical education and the larger health professions education field with clinical reasoning, competency-based education, programmatic assessment, adaptive expertise. We were working towards a milestones project when I left Ithaca, an adapted milestones project to really explicitly lead the way in competency-based education. And that's hard work and it's resource intensive. And I'm very proud of the work folks that my teams and I did at those 2 institutions, especially at Ithaca. And they're still doing great work, Pat and Jen McKeon and the other folks leading that program. And there are other programs doing it too in different ways. But, being a young program director now, I'm trying to figure out how to teach well, how to mentor well, how to develop a body of scholarship, how to look at the economics of the program, being pressured to have 20 students a year come in the door. To keep the place open, I don't know. Maybe it's just because I'm an old guy now, yelling at the clouds. But it made it easier for me to think about. Okay, now's my time. I appreciate you letting me be on this and reflect and speak on it more and wax poetic a little bit. But again, a couple of folks and I are thinking about doing another paper and kind of revisiting this concept a little bit just to keep kind of going back in, and I'd be remiss if I didn't, highlight, the 80, the AATE is doing great things and they're developing a lot of research and they're doing high level work. And Kaylee Welsh Bacon and Julie and a couple other folks and Stacy Walker are doing a lot of great things there with collecting data and sharing information. Again, it's great that they're doing that. The negatives are that you have to pay a couple $1,000s to be a member as an institution, and a lot of places don't have that money, especially now. I mean, if I had an AT program right now, they came to me and said, "Hey, we want to join 80 because it does this, and this." I got to say no, I don't have the money. But they're doing good work, and it's sad. It kind of goes back to some of our earlier conversations. It's sad that the NHA is not doing that. Right? It's sad that somebody had to start it outside the NATA. This really focused research and conversation on the education side, because without an educator side that's informed and advancing and developing their own line of research, it dies. PT is one of our biggest competitors, right? They're way ahead of us in terms of education. They got at least 1 journal. I think they have at least 2. They have 3 or 4 SIGs as part of APTA. They're ahead of us on what they're doing and studying what works. They're working on an trustable professional activities model, which is the hallmark of residency education in Europe and medical education and a few places here in America, like in PEDS and stuff like that. So they're ahead of us in that regard. There's no reason why we can't duplicate that on our own level and transfer. We need more AT folks getting health professions education training. If I had to do it over again, I'd get my PhD in health professions education from maybe Maastricht University in the Netherlands, which is one of the leaders. and that sort of thing. We need people doing that, not getting a generic EDD. No disrespect, mine is an EDD, not a generic EDD in human learning, adult learning, or something like that. We need folks studying health professions education from Harvard Macy and the Wilson Center at the University of Toronto and Maastricht and Utrecht in the Netherlands. These places that are leading the world in best practices in health professions ed, right? And just transferring that from medicine to AT, which is what I was trying to do the last few years of my career with. Both of my scholarship and presentations and papers, and on the ground with the Ithaca AT program. And so I moved on, got out of that, but they're doing good work there too. That's what we need. The Educators Conference needs to have external speakers that are outside the AT world coming and rocking our world and saying, you're not doing CBE because you're not doing this. You think you're doing programmatic assessment, you're not, right? We need that kind of influence and fast. And again, there are people doing it. We need more people doing it. We need a larger, louder voice on those levels.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I would love to have you on again to talk about anything else that we missed today.
Anytime.
I think we touched everything.
I would love to do, maybe, again, you can edit this out, but, I developed a clinical reasoning model that's 3-tiered: diagnostic reasoning, therapeutic reasoning, and contextual reasoning. And I never got a time to publish that, but I presented it a few times and I teach it in the PT program. So that would be a more clinical based one, define clinical reasoning, and then to go into the 3 different parts and give examples. So if you're interested in listening to me rant more, I could do that I could do it tomorrow. I wouldn't need any prep. So.
Well, yeah, I'll look at my schedule, and I think that would be a great one to do also.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much.
It's a great pleasure, Shelby. Thank you for the opportunity, and keep doing what you're doing. It's important work, so it's very, very much needed, and you're doing great stuff. So keep it up.
Thank you.
Cheers.
That's it for today's episode of To the Bone. I hope we've sparked some new thoughts, challenged your perspectives, or simply reminded you to dig a little deeper. Remember, life isn't just about what's on the surface. Sometimes you've got to cut deeper and get to the bone of what really matters. To the Bone podcast is a product of Daly LLC. It's hosted and produced by Shelby Daly, ATC, and Randy Daly. No clinical decision-making should be based solely on one source. While care is taken to ensure accuracy, factual errors can be present. For more on the show, visit www.tothebonepodcast.com. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Get involved in the conversation. You can find us at www.tothebonepodcast.com. Drop us topic suggestions or be a potential guest. We're all about connecting with you, our listeners. Until next time, stay curious, stay grounded, and keep cutting deep.